Imagine you are standing at the edge of the known world. The year is somewhere in the 8th century. The wind smells of salt and iron and something older, something that has no name in any language you speak. Ahead of you is the sea, gray and infinite. Behind you is a world built on blood oaths, on the screams of gods, on the absolute certainty that strength is not just admired here. It is the law. This is Kattegat, and in this world everyone smiles before they betray you. The Vikings universe, the television saga that ran from 2013 to 2020 that gripped millions across the globe, is not at its heart a story about war. It is a story about something far more dangerous than war. It is a story about ambition without conscience, about what happens when human beings are given power, mythology, and no one strong enough to stop them. And in that story, certain people burned the world around them. Certain people lied, tortured, manipulated, and destroyed. Not out of necessity, not even out of survival, but out of something darker. Something we recognize even now, sitting in the warm glow of our screens. Something very, very human. Today, we are not here to celebrate them. Today, we are here to look them in the eye and name, clearly and calmly, exactly why each of them deserved the fate the universe eventually handed down. Or in some cases, why the universe should have acted sooner. Before we name names, understand the world these people inhabited. Norse society in Vikings is not chaotic. It has rules. It has a structure as rigid as any civilization on Earth. There is the Thing, a democratic assembly where disputes are resolved publicly. There is honor, not as a soft virtue, but as a social currency more valuable than silver. There is loyalty, bound by oaths sworn before gods who are watching, always watching. The world of Kattegat operates on a brutal but coherent moral logic. Be strong, be honest, be faithful to your word, and the gods will favor you. Betray those principles and you invite catastrophe, not just upon yourself, but upon everyone around you. This is important because every person on this list did not simply make a mistake. They did not simply fall victim to circumstance. They chose to corrode the very codes that made their world function. They chose deceit when honesty was available. They chose cruelty when mercy would have served. They chose ego over everything, over family, over tribe, over the sacred bond of human connection that, even in this brutal age, was considered inviolable. And in a world where the gods are watching, that choice always, always has a price. 1. King Ella of Northumbria. We begin not with a Viking, but with the man who made the legend of Ragnar Lothbrok eternal. King Ella is presented as a ruler with a sense of sophistication, a Christian king, a man of ceremony, of court ritual, of the trappings of civilization. And that veneer is precisely what makes his cruelty so unforgivable. When Ragnar Lothbrok falls into his hands, weakened, betrayed, a shadow of the man who once stood at the prow of every raid, Ella does not execute him as a warrior. He does not honor the code of a worthy enemy. He throws Ragnar into a pit of serpents. He turns death into spectacle. He turns a legendary man into entertainment. He deserved the blood eagle, not because Norse revenge mythology demanded it, but because Ella chose the theater of cruelty over the dignity of a clean death. He understood what he was doing. He made it a show. And when Ragnar's sons came back, when the great heathen army descended on Northumbria, like the wrath of every god in the Norse pantheon, Ella seemed genuinely surprised, as if consequence was something that happened to other people. It wasn't. 2. King Ecbert of Wessex. Ecbert is perhaps the most intellectually dangerous man in the entire series. He is charming. He is brilliant. He quotes philosophy and studies Roman manuscripts, and speaks to Ragnar as an equal. Perhaps the only man Ragnar ever truly respected. And that charm is the weapon he wields with the precision of a surgeon and the conscience of a stone. He promises the Vikings land. He signs a treaty, witnessed and sworn, and then, quietly behind that warm smile and those intelligent eyes, he orders the slaughter of every Viking settler, men, women, children, who trusted his word and built lives on his soil. He never holds the sword himself. That is what makes him so damnable. Ekber is the archetype of the man who does evil with clean hands, who lets others carry out his will and then retreats into philosophy and wine and self-reflection. Not because he feels genuine guilt, but because self-reflection is another performance, another layer of the mask. He dies on his own terms, which feels cosmically unjust. But perhaps there is a punishment worse than the blood eagle. Perhaps it is spending your final years knowing that every person you ever loved paid the price for your ambitions and still not being sure you would have chosen differently. That is its own kind of hell. 3. Aethelwulf. Aethelwulf is not the most powerful villain on this list. He is in many ways the most pitiable, but pity does not excuse cruelty. The son of Ecgber, Aethelwulf is defined by what he is not. He is not his father's intellectual equal, not Athelstan's spiritual openness, not anything that the world around him seems to value. And from that deep well of insecurity, he draws his violence. His treatment of his wife Judith, public humiliation, physical cruelty, the systematic attempt to break her spirit, is not the act of a warrior or even a brute. It is the act of a small man wielding institutional power over someone who cannot fight back. He wraps his cruelty in the language of righteousness, of Christian duty, of a husband's God-given authority. He deserved far worse than he received, and the fact that he eventually becomes something approaching a decent king does not erase what he chose to do when no one powerful enough to stop him was watching. 4. Jarl Borg. Jarl Borg is a study in what happens when intelligence is unmoored from principle. He is perceptive. He reads people well, he understands strategy, and he uses every one of those gifts in service of an ego so vast it eventually consumes him entirely. He betrays Ragnar. He invades Kattegat while Ragnar is away, burning, pillaging, terrorizing the very people Ragnar had left undefended in trust. He does this not out of survival, not because Kattegat posed a genuine threat, but because he was offered a deal and couldn't resist the opportunity to grab more. Greed dressed in strategy is still greed. When Ragnar returns and submits Borg to the Blood Eagle, the audience is not meant to feel only horror at the ritual. They are meant to feel the terrible weight of a world with consequences. Borg knew the codes. He chose to break them anyway. The price was always going to be paid. 5. Queen Aslaug. Aslaug is a complicated figure, and that complexity does not excuse her. She arrives in Ragnar's life as prophecy made flesh. Beautiful, mystical, the daughter of legendary Sigurd and Brynhildr, a woman touched by the sight. And she uses every inch of that mythology as armor and as weapon. Her cruelty to Athelstan, her contempt for Ragnar's deepest friendship, her systematic undermining of a man who represented everything she feared, genuine spiritual authenticity, a love she could not compete with, is quiet but relentless. She never raises her voice. She never needs to. And her abandonment of her own children, her emotional distance, the way she wrapped herself in prophecy and mysticism to avoid the mundane work of actually loving the people around her, leaves wounds that echo through 2 generations. She was given gifts others would have died for. Sight, power, a throne. The love of the most famous man in the Norse world. She squandered all of it chasing a significance that was already hers. 6. Earl Sigvard. Earl Sigvard deserves his place on this list, not because of military treachery or political manipulation, but because of something more intimate and therefore more insidious. He is the husband who is also the captor. He takes Aslaug's son, Bjorn's mother, Lagertha, as his wife, and proceeds to make her life a daily exercise in humiliation and cruelty. Public degradation. Violence dressed up as authority. Lagertha is one of the most formidable human beings in the entire series. And watching Sigvard deliberately attempt to crush that spirit, not out of fear, but out of a need to own what he cannot match, is one of the series' most quietly disturbing portrayals of domestic tyranny. When Lagertha ends him, it does not feel like violence. It feels like the natural correction of a world briefly out of alignment. 7. Erlendur. Erlendur is the kind of villain who is most dangerous precisely because he does not announce himself. The son of King Horik, himself a treacherous and deserving entry on any such list. Erlendur carries his father's murder by Ragnar as a wound that never closes. He is patient. He waits. He works from the shadows, manipulating, threatening, slowly building toward a revenge that will never actually heal him. His campaign against Bjorn, using Torvi as a weapon, using an innocent woman as a mechanism of murder, is cowardly in the deepest sense. He will not face his enemy directly. He cannot. So he corrupts everything he touches instead. When he finally meets his end, there is no dramatic revelation, no final speech, just the quiet, almost unremarkable conclusion of a life built entirely around someone else's death. 8. Ivar the Boneless. At his worst, Ivar is perhaps the most tragic figure on this list, and tragedy does not grant exemption. His intelligence is extraordinary. His strategic mind, his charisma, his ability to inspire loyalty in men who should know better, these are genuine gifts, and the series never lets you forget that the same wounds that made him monstrous also made him brilliant. But let us be clear about what Ivar chooses to do with that brilliance. He murders his own brother Sigurd in a fit of rage, not in battle, not even in a genuine dispute, but because Sigurd laughed at him. He builds a cult of personality in Kattegat, rebranding himself as a god, demanding worship from the very people his family bled to protect. He becomes the thing that Vikings were always accused of being by their enemies, a force of pure destruction with no redemptive purpose. The tragedy is not that Ivar is evil. The tragedy is that Ivar knows better, has always known better, and chooses violence and ego and the performance of invulnerability anyway. Because vulnerability, the thing that could have saved him, is the one thing he cannot bear. 9. Bishop Haemond. Haemond is a righteous man who commits unrighteous acts and calls both by the same name, God's will. He is a killer who confesses and kills again. He is a man who tortures with prayer on his lips. And his greatest crime is not the violence itself. In this world, violence is the currency of survival. His greatest crime is the sanctification of it, the insistence that his cruelty is holy, that his God approves. That combination, absolute moral conviction combined with absolute moral flexibility, has caused more suffering throughout history than simple wickedness ever could. Simple wickedness knows what it is. Haemond never does. 10. King Horik. And here we arrive at perhaps the purest embodiment of the series' central thesis. King Horik is not the most brutal man in Vikings. He is not the most intelligent or the most ambitious or the most cruel. What makes him uniquely deserving of his end is the combination of all those qualities with one additional ingredient. He believes he is the hero of the story. He uses Ragnar. He cultivates Floki's religious fanaticism as a tool. He smiles and feasts and swears oaths and plans assassination with the same hand that holds the drinking horn. He brings his entire family, his sons, his legacy, everything, into a conspiracy that was never going to succeed against a man like Ragnar Lothbrok. And he does it all with the unshakable conviction of a man who has never once genuinely reckoned with the possibility that he might be wrong. When Ragnar ends him, it is not justice in the formal sense, but it is something the universe seems to require. The removal of a particular kind of man, the kind who mistakes the mask for the face and cannot understand why the world refuses to be deceived. Here is what all 10 of these people share, beneath the specifics of their sins. Each of them lived in a world that offered them a choice. The choice that is, at its core, the only choice that has ever mattered in any era, in any civilization, on any shore. The choice between using power to build something beyond yourself or using it to serve only yourself. And each of them, in their own way, chose the self. Ella chose the spectacle of cruelty over the dignity of an honorable enemy. Egbert chose the comfort of his own intellect over the basic obligation of his word. Aslaug chose mythology over motherhood. Ivar chose the performance of godhood over the terrifying vulnerability of being simply, fully human. The world of Vikings is brutal. It does not pretend otherwise. Men die badly, women suffer, children pay the price for their father's ambitions. No one gets away clean. But the show, at its most profound, is arguing something ancient in something urgent. That the measure of a person, in any age, under any sky, by any god's accounting, is not how much power they accumulate. It is what they do with the moment when they could choose cruelty and choose something else instead. Every world produces its monsters. Every era, every civilization, every court and hall and throne room eventually generates the person who looks at the rules that hold society together, the promises, the codes, the sacred obligations, and decides quietly, privately, that those rules were written for other people. What makes Vikings remarkable is not that it punishes these people. It does not always. Some of them die peacefully. Some of them die having won. Some of them die loved. What makes it remarkable is that it shows you, with extraordinary clarity, the cost, not just to the people they destroyed, though the camera lingers on those faces, those burned villages, those hollow-eyed survivors, but the cost to themselves, the isolation, the paranoia, the way that every relationship becomes tactical, every gesture transactional, until the person is alone in a fortress of their own construction and cannot remember when the walls went up. Power without conscience does not merely destroy others. It hollows the one who holds it. And perhaps that is the oldest truth the Norse sagas were ever trying to tell. That the gods are not watching to punish the wicked. They are watching to see whether the wicked will eventually understand what they have done to themselves. Whether in the end, we are capable of that most difficult of human acts, looking clearly at what we have become, and choosing, even now, even this late, to become something else.